Okay, welcome back to a devotion time. We are in the New Testament in this reading, and we're going to be in Matthew chapter 23, working our way to the famous Matthew 24, which is Christ prophesying to his disciples. And that one I'm going to have to spend a lot of time on when I get to that one. But 23 is going to be interesting as well. Now, 22, we looked at the parable of the wedding feast and describes which is the first commandment of all and so forth. And should they pay taxes to Caesar? And we talked about that's where the separation of church and state came from. That the church doesn't run the state and the state does not run the church, or the government, the national government doesn't run the church and the church does not run the national government. That is a clear principle in Scripture that we found in chapter 22. Um, that the two show, that they have different functions. God designed them for different purposes and different functions, and He did not want them to be theocratic in that sense. And the problem with theocracy is that, I mean, a government can somewhat survive with theocracy. Um, as long as it's not a theocracy that is overbearing. Because, I mean, God set up a theocracy for Israel in the Old Covenant, but the church cannot survive a theocracy. A theocracy will compromise in a church. It will do a lot of damage to the church. The Church of England, for example, is theocratic and it has a lot of power in the government in England. So that's an example of a kind of a semi-theocracy going on there. So theocracies don't really work. And that was clear, Matthew chapter 22 really brings that out. 23, Jesus is about to rebuke the Pharisees. And man, is he going to rebuke them. Now, the Pharisees, of course, were the religious and somewhat political leaders of Israel in the first century. And this is about the life of Christ, and he's going to rebuke them. Begin in verse 1. Then Jesus spoke to the multitudes and to his disciples, saying, the scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. Therefore, whatever they tell you to observe, that observe and do. Now he's talking to his apostles because you see that they're still in the old covenant economy there. They're still the old covenant is still in effect. See, Christ had not died on the cross yet. That was the dividing line between the old and the new covenant. Once Christ had his death, burial, and resurrection, that was the spark of the beginning of the new covenant. And that was the beginning of the waning and death of the old covenant. And the death of the old covenant is kind of somewhat of a slow death. It was from the resurrection of Christ to the destruction of the Jerusalem of the temple in AD 70. That was the final nail into the coffin of the old covenant. You see, the new covenant and the old covenant ran parallel for a little bit there, or at least the Jews practicing the old covenant with a temple involved was there from that time period. It was about 40 years in that time period from the start of the ministry of Christ to the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in AD 70. 3 years into that ministry, that was the death, burial, resurrection, which was the spark of the beginning of the new covenant, the covenant that God had made with Adam and Eve, or, that Eve, the seed of Eve, would, crush the head of the serpent. Well, that was the cross of Christ. And that was out of Genesis, if I recall, Genesis chapter 3, around verse 15 or so, That was the covenant that was being fulfilled with the cross of Christ. And so that covenant is fulfilled. It doesn't, the covenant is an everlasting covenant in that it brings salvation to us. And that's what the covenant was from the very beginning, all the way back to Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. But let me go back where he says, the scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. Therefore, whatever they tell you to observe, that observe and do, but do not do according to their works, for they say and do not. They say and do not do, is how it's written. They're hypocrites. They tell you to do what you're supposed to do, but then they don't go and do it, is what he's saying. Now, they're supposed to be following the Levitical law. They're supposed to be following the law of Moses, but they're not doing it. They're adding to the law. They're making up their own rules and becoming their own righteousness. Verse 4, for they bind heavy burdens hard to bear and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves will not move them with one of their fingers. But all their works they do to be seen by men. They make their phylacteries broad. Phylacteries were the boxes they'd put on their head that had the commandments written inside the box. And enlarge the borders of the garments, their long flowing robes. They love the best places at feast, the best seats in the synagogues, greetings in the marketplaces, and to be called by men, Rabbi, Rabbi, meaning teacher. Today we'd say professor, professor. Oh, great men of great knowledge and intelligence and learning, right? But you do not be called Rabbi. Don't be lifted up like that. For one is your teacher, the Christ, and you are all brethren. So Jesus Christ was their only teacher. Do not call anyone on earth your father. And that doesn't mean in a cultural sense that I don't have a father, an earthly father. I do. He's talking in the sense of the reverence that's owed to God. Okay. In other words, you don't want to give reverence to a religious leader that belongs to God and not to that religious leader. Do not call anyone on earth your father, for one is your father, he who is in heaven. And do not be called teachers, for one is your teacher, the Christ. But he who is greatest among you shall be your servant. And whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. And that's the rule, right? Those who are humble, God exalts them, but those who build themselves up with self-pride, God won't exalt them. They exalt themselves. But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. Now, Jesus, I thought, was a really nice and sweet guy, not a guy that would run around saying that kind of stuff to somebody. At least that's what some teachers in the church would have you to believe, but it's false. Christ spoke truth, and he spoke it boldly, and he didn't care who it was he was speaking it to. And woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut up the kingdom of heaven against men. For you neither go in yourselves, nor do you allow those who are entering to go in. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you devour widows' houses, and for a pretense make long prayers. Therefore you will receive greater condemnation. You know, there are people today that devour widows' houses. They're usually on television, and they're telling those poor widows to give to their ministry, and God will bless them tenfold. for giving their rent money or their grocery money to the ministry. That TV preacher. Yeah. Shysters, wolves in sheep's clothing. No, widows are to be taken care of by the church, not fleeced. Woe to you. Well, let me go back. I missed a portion. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. Let me go back to 13, get a full run since I commented. But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut up the kingdom of heaven against men, for you neither go in yourselves, nor do you allow those who are entering to go in. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you devour widows' houses, and for pretense, make long prayers. Therefore you will receive the greater condemnation. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you travel land and sea to win one proselyte. And when he is won, you make him twice as much a son of hell as yourselves. The Lord is laying it to these guys. Woe to you, blind guys who say, whoever swears by the temple is nothing, but whoever swears by the gold of the temple, because they were envious, or they desired the gold, right, for themselves, the greedy, greedy people. Whoever swears by the gold of the temple, he is obliged to perform it. Fools and blind. For which is greater, the gold or the temple that sacrifices the gold? And whoever swears by the altar where they sacrifice the animals, it is nothing. But whoever swears by the gift that is on it, he is obliged to perform it. I mean, they just made up whatever they wanted to make up. Fools and blind. For which is greater, the gift or the altar that sacrifices the gift? Therefore, he who swears by the altar swears by it and by all things on it. He who swears by the temple swears by it and by him who dwells in it. And he who swears by heaven swears by the throne of God and by him who sits on it. That was still, the Holy of Holies in that temple was still God's throne on the earth. Very sacred place. And it was supposed to be reverenced. It's representing the one who was talking to them. Everything in that temple was representing something about the sacrifice that Christ was going to give. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faith. Yeah, they followed the Levitical law of the first fruits, the tithe, but they didn't have mercy, justice, or faith. It was just an outward religious, just going through the motions. These you ought to have done. Yeah, you're supposed to follow the Levitical law up until the point where it's fulfilled on the cross. Then you don't follow that anymore. Not the ceremonial law. Moral law, yes. I'm not antinomian. The moral law was not done away with. I can't go to Walmart down here and start stealing and say, well, the law was fulfilled. It was done away with. We don't follow the law anymore. I can go steal at Walmart if I want to. No, that's an antinomian position. That is incorrect. It was a ceremonial law that was done away with. Yeah, it was the civil law for the nation of Israel. that was done away with, but the moral law remained. It defines the justice and righteousness of God, His holiness. These you ought to have done without leaving the others undone. Blind guides who strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. You get so focused on the little tiny things that you made up in the law, and you get all worked up over that, and you completely miss the whole spirit of the law, the whole purpose of the law. That's the swallowing of a camel. The straining of the gnat is getting all worked up over the little things that really don't mean anything. Yeah. In the law that they made up, it was not in the Levitical law, it was just an extension of it. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you cleanse the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are full of extortion and self-indulgence. Blind Pharisee, first cleanse the inside of the cup and dish, that the outside of them may be clean also. What's he saying here? Clean your soul up first so that the outside appearance of all this religious appearance would actually mean something. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like whitewashed tombs. Old King James says sepulchres, which indeed appear beautiful outwardly, but inside are full of dead men's bones and all uncleanness. They were dead on the inside, dead in trespasses and sins, Ephesians 2:1 says. Even so, you also outwardly appear righteous to men. You play the game, and there are people today that can play that game really well. But inside you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you build the tombs of the prophets and adorn the monuments of the righteous, and say, if we had lived in the days of our fathers, we would not have been partakers with them in the blood of the prophets. Therefore, you are witnesses against yourselves that you are sons of those who murdered the prophets. Fill up then the measure of your father's guilt. Serpents, brood of vipers, how can you escape the condemnation of hell? Wow. I'm going to finish this and I'm going to tell you the significance of this in just a moment. Therefore, indeed, I send you prophets, wise men, and scribes. Some of them you will kill and crucify, and some of them you will scourge in your synagogues and persecute from city to city, that on you may come all the righteous blood shed on the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Barachiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. Assuredly, I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. Now, that's vital. He's talking about the generation that was alive at the time that Christ was walking the earth and talking to these Pharisees. Now, Jesus, now, let me, before I go to the next thing, the significance of this. Jesus is rebuking this outward religion without inward reality. They were not regenerate of heart. They were not true followers of the God that they claimed to follow. It was just an all an outward act. Inside of their mind and their heart, they were full of all kinds of wickedness. and they would not even recognize the one who could cleanse them of that wickedness that pervaded their hearts. Now Jesus is going to lament over Jerusalem. Now remember, this is in context with everything he just told the Pharisees. He just told them they're lost, blind guides, they're hypocrites, they're full of dead men's bones. They have an outward appearance, but they don't have any inward reality when it comes to their worship of God. And now he's going to extend it to Jerusalem, the entire city, because he knows what's coming. And he's about to tell what's coming in chapter 24. Jerusalem has, at this point, maybe 39 years or so, and then mass destruction is about to come on Jerusalem in AD 70. So here's Christ lamenting. What's going to happen to Jerusalem? Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together, as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. How many times in the old covenant did they not gather to God? How many bad kings did they have in First and Second Kings, First and Second Samuel? Verse 38. See, your house, the temple, is left to you desolate. The temple is about to go down. It's going to be destroyed. For I say to you, you shall see me no more till you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. He just pronounced judgment on them. Jerusalem, judgment is coming. He's lamenting what's about to happen to them. But who's going to be the one that causes this to happen? Christ. The one who's lamenting them is the one who will bring that very judgment. We're going to be in chapter 24, the Olivet Discourse. And I want to show you some things out of the Olivet Discourse when we come back to this reading, maybe tomorrow, maybe hopefully tomorrow. And I want to explain to you at that time why the Olivet Discourse is not telling us in our day what the signs of the times of the end. Why that is a false paradigm and what it's actually talking about. It is talking about a prophecy, but not the prophecy that most preachers and folks on YouTube and stuff are saying. There are some out there that are going to say what I'm going to say. A number of theologians and pastors that are going to go down the line that I'm going to go down with Matthew 24. So if you want to know what that is, keep watching these videos and you'll come to it. Hopefully tomorrow. Thank you for watching. Are we? Oh no, I gotta go. I gotta go. I'm sorry, I'm not done yet. Why y'all letting me go already? All right. We're gonna be in Second Corinthians chapter 9 to round this out. And this is ministering the gift. This is a gifts to the church, I believe is what he's going to be talking about to some degree. Or no, ministering the gift. Did we do this already? Yeah, we did this, a cheerful giver and giving. We're going to be in chapter 10, the spiritual war. Second Corinthians, the last time we were in chapter 9. This is a letter to the second letter to the church at Corinth. And Corinth was that port city where all that multi diversity was going on, and it affected the church. And the first letter to the church, First Corinthians, corrected all of that. And in this one, he's restoring the church back to grace. He's going to talk about the spiritual war in chapter 10, and it's Paul writing it. Now I, Paul, myself, am pleading with you by the meekness and gentleness of Christ, who in presence am lowly among you, but being absent am bold toward you. But I beg you that when I am present, I may not be bold with that confidence by which I intend to be bold against some, who think of us as if we walked according to the flesh. For through, so, for though we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal. Remember that one. There's a lot of carnal weaponry coming from Christians on social media lately. Be careful with that. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty in God for pulling down strongholds, casting down arguments, and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, bringing every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ, and being ready to punish all disobedience when your obedience is fulfilled. Do you look at things according to the outward appearance? If anyone is convinced in himself that he is Christ, that he belongs to Christ, in other words, let him again consider this in himself, that just as he is Christ, or belongs to Christ, even so we are Christ, belong to Christ. For even if I should boast somewhat more about our authority, Paul talking about his apostleship, which the Lord gave us for edification and not for your destruction, I shall not be ashamed, lest I seem to terrify you by letters. The first letter, I'm sure, was pretty terrifying to them because he laid into them pretty good. For his letters, they say, are weighty and powerful, but his bodily presence is weak and his speech contemptible. Who are the they he's talking about? Well, there were men in that church that were challenging the authority of Paul and challenging his first letter to First Corinthians, his first letter that went out to them. And he's kind of fighting back. Let such a person consider this, that what we are in word by letters, when we are absent, such we will also be indeed when we are present. So, what you got in the letter, Church at Corinth, you're going to get when I show up in person. It's going to be the same, is what he's telling them. For we dare not class ourselves or compare ourselves with those, excuse me, with those who commend themselves, these puffed up men in the church that are claiming that, oh, listen to us, don't listen to Paul. No, we have more authority. No, we know more than Paul. That kind of thing, that kind of arrogance. He says, so concerning those folks, he says, for we dare not class ourselves or compare ourselves with those who commend themselves. He's being facetious here. He's kind of a little bit of mockery going on. Oh, we don't compare ourselves to them. But they measure themselves by themselves. They kind of puff themselves up, right? Among themselves are not, yeah, I'm sorry, but they measure themselves by themselves and comparing themselves among themselves are not wise. We see this today, this kind of thing. I'll give you an example is when people who are popular on social media kind of prop each other up, you know. um, or any situation where people who are kind of kindred spirits are promoting each other, and by doing so, they keep rising together. That's kind of what he was talking about here about these guys who, number one, are not teaching the correct things. They're false teachers. They're challenging the authority of the Apostle Paul, and they keep kind of, oh yeah, well he's a great guy. Oh no, he's a great guy, and you should listen to what he has to say. And they're puffing each other up. That's what was going on here in Corinth. But comparing themselves among themselves, they are not wise. We, however, will not boast beyond measure. We're not going to puff ourselves up. God will do that. God will, you know, raise up the humble, right? But within the limits of the sphere which God appointed us, a sphere which especially includes you. God made Paul to be an apostle to the church, and he's doing his job that God gave him to do. For we are not overextending ourselves as though our authority did not extend to you. Yeah, he said, we do have that authority. We're not pretending here. For it was to you that we came with the gospel of Christ. It was Apostle Paul that established that church in the first place and taught them the gospel. Not boasting of things beyond measure, that is, in other men's labors. We didn't take credit for what other men did, like Apollos. Because Paul said at one point, he said in the first letter that he wrote to them, he said, Paul planted, Apollos watered, and God gave increase, right? He doesn't take credit for what other men did. He's only doing what God told him to do. So he doesn't do that. That is in other men's labors, but having hope that as your faith is increased, we shall be greatly enlarged by you in our sphere. To preach the gospel, to preach the gospel in the regions beyond you, and not to boast in another man's sphere of accomplishment. But he who glories, let him glory in the Lord. In other words, give God the glory. I am able to do what I'm able to do because of God's grace, He gave me that ability, and I use it to His glory. I mean, that's where the attitude needs to be, not braggadocious about ourselves. For not he who commends himself is approved, but whom the Lord commends. So a little lesson in humility and not being puffed up with pride. And we'll be in chapter 11 in the next reading. And we're done. We're 4 minutes over. Thank you for watching. And the next time I come, we'll be in some books that I've been going through. We're done with our Bible reading for this day. And of course, I have other Bible reading I do that I don't do on there for the men's study and for Sunday school that I teach with some other men that we rotate teaching that Sunday school at the church. I'm actually a deacon there, and then there are elders there that teach as well. I'm the only teaching deacon that I know of in the church because they recognized that I had a gift to teach and to a love for teaching others and a love for those whom I teach. And so they gave me that opportunity, and I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful to be used of God for His purpose in that way, humbled by it. But that's where we are. So, and the Apostle Paul is saying the same thing, humbled by God, that God even chose him to do what he did. It chose him to be an apostle. Paul was always amazed by that, humbled by it. All right. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time here on the C Files.